What is up, you guys? Shan's here, and I'm so excited to bring you another episode of the Completely Living podcast where we talk Bible, faith, and go wherever the Holy Spirit leads us. And today we're going to be going through Genesis chapter 15. So if you have not seen the book of Genesis up until this point, make sure you go back and watch the other videos. We've been going through the Bible in chronological order, which means that we stopped at one point, went through the book of Job, and then we're back in Genesis going through it. And I will be reading from the New Living Translation. Now, you can feel free to read whatever translation you find best, but I will be reading the NLT version, and I will put the words on the screen. So if you're able to watch the video, you can follow along. The first heading that I have here for chapter 15 is the Lord's covenant promise to Abraham. Verse 1. Sometime later, the Lord spoke to Abraham in a vision and said to him, "Do not be afraid, Abram." Oh, I called him Abraham. His name's not Abraham yet. It's Abram. "For I will protect you, and your reward will be great." Something interesting to note here is that God is speaking to Abram in a vision, and it is the first mention in the Bible of the phrase, "do not be afraid," which God comes back and says, "do not be afraid" several times, or it's mentioned several times throughout the Bible. Somebody who is not me counted and said there are 365 different individual mentions of the phrase, "do not be afraid," or I don't know if that's the exact phrase or if it's like a variation of "don't be afraid," but 365. So one for every day. So just remember, God has not given us a spirit of fear. Verse 2. But Abram replied, "O sovereign Lord, what good are all of your blessings when I don't even have a son? Since you've given me no children, Eliezer of Damascus, a servant in my household, will inherit all of my wealth." Or will inherit all my wealth. I think it's interesting here that Abram has the audacity to actually come to God and say, "What good are all your blessings?" Like, excuse me? Oh, you really coming to God with the honesty. I appreciate that. But wow. Verse 3, "You have given me no descendants of my own, so one of my servants will be my heir." Then the Lord said to him, "No, your servant will not be your heir, for you will have a son of your own who will be your heir." Then the Lord took Abram outside and said to him, "Look up into the sky and count the stars if you can. That's how many descendants you will have." I love how God is like, count the stars if you can. My Lord is so sassy sometimes. Like, I love it because he knows that we can't. We definitely cannot. We're still discovering new stars. So he is saying, you are going to have so many descendants. You cannot count them, Abram. Like, just trust me on this. You know what? Hold on. And then trust me on this. It's interesting because Abram trusted God and left his entire family, left everything he knew to go on this journey, to go to the promised land, but he still questions God. So it's just the reminder that common human nature of sometimes we are just, yep, I'm down. I trust God right now, right here, right now. And then other times we're like, are you sure? But what good will it do? You know? Verse 6, "And Abram believed the Lord." Good on you, Abram. "And the Lord counted him as righteous because of his faith." I love that. Verse 7, "Then the Lord said to him, I am the Lord who blessed you, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land as your possession." To give you this land as your possession. So just wait for it, Abram. But Abram replied, "O sovereign Lord, how can I be sure that I will actually possess it?" Then God told him, "Bring me a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon." So Abram presented all of these to him and killed them. Then he cut each animal down the middle and laid the halves side by side. He did not, however, cut the birds in half. Some vultures swooped down to eat the carcasses, but Abram chased them away. So the idea here is that he didn't cut the birds in half because they were just simply too small to cut in half. So the reason that he is doing this, he's cutting these animals in half, is because it is custom at the time that when you are making a promise to someone, you would cut the animals in half, and then the person who's making the promise would then walk through the middle or the carcasses of the animals. And it's basically saying, if I don't keep my word, let what has happened to these animals happen to me. So that's how serious this is. Like that's just the way that they're, rather than just doing a handshake or modern day signing a contract, they are cutting these animals in half and they're declaring, if I don't keep my word, this is what should happen to me. At least that's what they do in the human sense. So that's why God is having Abram do this right now. In case you didn't, I don't know, I didn't know that before. So in case you didn't have that background. Another fun fact is that the word covenant in Hebrew, it's something, I'm going to mess it up, but I think it's pronounced berith. And that word actually means to cut. So the word covenant means to cut. He's cutting the animals, so it's all interconnected. Verse 12. As the sun was going down, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a terrifying darkness came down over him. Then the Lord said to Abram, "You can be sure that your descendants will be strangers in a foreign land, where they will be oppressed as slaves for 400 years. But I will punish the nation that enslaves them, and in the end they will come away with great wealth. As for you, you will die in peace and be buried at a ripe old age. After 4 generations, your descendants will return here to this land, for the sins of the Amorites do not yet warrant their destruction." So let's talk about this. First of all, God is already telling Abram about what is happening in Egypt, or what's going to happen in Egypt, that his descendants are going to end up enslaved for 400 years, which is what ends up happening to the Hebrew people when they are in Egypt. If you know the story of Moses and the Exodus from Egypt, that is what that's all about. And I think it is wonderful that God, he says here that the sins of the Amorites do not yet warrant their destruction. This is actually a sign of God's mercy. And he's not prematurely casting judgment on this group of people. He knows that they're not necessarily following him, and God's outside of space and time, so God knows that some of them are never going to follow him. But he gives them 400 years to get it right. The Amorites are in that land for 400 years, and I'm sure in that 400 years, some of them are going to repent and come to the fullness and knowledge of Christ, and some of them aren't. And God is going to give them that opportunity. He's not going to just give the land over to Abram right now and prematurely cast judgment on them, on the Amorites. He's giving them a chance. He's giving them a chance. He's giving them time to come to him, which is something that God does with all of us. There's so many of us who, if you think about it, the moment that you actually got saved, there's so much time before that where you were not, where God was waiting. He was just giving you the chance, giving you the opportunity to come to him. You were going through so many different things, and God is patiently waiting, standing by, ready to take you into his arms at any moment. And that's probably exactly what he's doing with these people, even though he knows a lot of them will not come to him. Verse 17. After the sun went down and darkness fell, Abram saw a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch pass between the halves of the carcass. So those things, the fire pot and the flaming torch, are symbols of God. So it's God passing through the carcass, as we talked about, those halves of the animal. So passing through, making a covenant with Abram. And something that's so interesting is that it's only God who's passing through these carcasses. It is God's promise to Abram. Abram is not making a promise to God at this point. Abram's not passing through the carcasses. It's just God doing it because he loves us, because he's willing to make that promise to us without anything in return. Verse 18. So the Lord made a covenant with Abram that day and said, "I have given this land to your descendants, all the way from the border of Egypt to the great Euphrates River. The land now occupied by the Kenites, the Kenizzites, Kadamites, Hittites, Perizzites, Raphites, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites." Whew, that's a lot of names. That's the end of chapter 15. And something that's interesting here, the border of Egypt all the way to the Euphrates River is an area of about 300,000 square miles. And that was the promised land. That's what God gave to the Hebrew people. The actual area that they're currently occupying is about 8,000 square miles, and nowhere near what God wanted them to occupy. And I think that is so interesting because God made this promise that they would have so much space, and we have so much conflict over this little bit of land that they actually are occupying currently, that the Jewish people are actually occupying currently. They were supposed to have 300,000 square miles, and they have 8. And there are conflicts and wars and fights and arguments constantly about this amount of land. And it's a sign to me, or it's a hint to me, that it has to be spiritual. It has to be a spiritual thing that's happening in that area. That is the end of Genesis 15. Please let me know what your thoughts are. If you have any comments, make sure you write them in the comment section below. Share the video, like, subscribe, do all of the things, anything to help out the channel. I truly do appreciate it, and I will see you next time.